here to talk about game technology and content creation for the next generation.
Trying to get people to use a computer game in a different way.
It's a very good question.
Being British, I don't do this expression of emotion thing.
Future Vision goes global. Next generation gaming is here, and at GDC Europe, see the future of game development. GDC Europe is brought to you by the team behind the Game Developers Conference in the U.S. Make plans to attend the GDCe in London, August 30th to September 1st.
Let's see, I want to start introducing Chris Trottier, who's going to help me with my presentation a little bit today. She's been working with me as a co-designer for about 5 years. And I'd like to start by also apologizing, first of all, to the translators, because I tend to go really fast, and because I always just want to cram so much into an hour. But if you can't keep up, feel free to just make up stuff, and it might be better than what I'm saying. Who knows? Also want to apologize for the title of this talk in the description, which I know was kind of hopelessly vague. What usually happens every year is GDC, they call me up and they say, we want you to do a talk, and I say, okay, and then a week later they say, what's your talk about? And so then I think about it for a while, and I get a rough idea of what I'm going to talk about, and then I give them some kind of generic title in that area. That's what usually happens, but this year was different. This year when they asked me what I was going to talk about, I just flat out lied. So I'm not really going to talk about the future of content. I'm really more, in fact, going to talk about a possible future of content. You know, it seems like the theme that I'm coming away from this conference with so far is that the next generation titles are going to be incredibly expensive. We're going to have to build mountains of content, and it's going to drive most of the smaller players out of the market. And I'd like to offer potentially an alternate vision of that. You know, I think that there is a way to deal with that more creatively. So maybe a more accurate title for this talk would be What I Learned About Content from The Sims. Now, you've probably heard me talk about this a bit, so we're going to do this a little fast. First of all, content is very expensive. This is a list of the content we had in The Sims 2. And compared to The Sims 1, it's, you know, just a mountain of work to make that stuff. Going back across the games I've worked on, looking at the teams scaling up. I showed you this slide last year if you saw my talk. If you look at the content side of that, it's growing disproportionately to the team size. You know, so it's scaling up non-linearly. So it's trending way up, and I think that's kind of what we're hearing at this conference today. You know, one problem with that is that, you know, for us to do twice as much content, it costs us about twice as much effort. But yet the value to the player really isn't twice as much. You know, and this is just basic utility theory. If you're on a desert island and I give you an apple, it's worth a lot, you know, to keep you from starving. Once you have 100 apples, you know, the 101st apple is not worth that much. So I think, you know, we're fighting kind of a losing battle here. On the other hand, we've seen that players love making content. Time and time again, every time we've given the players the opportunity to make content, they've just gone crazy with it. On our website for The Sims 2, we've already got something like 17,000 characters people have uploaded, 10,000 houses, etc. Now, obviously, not all this content is great, but even if only 5 or 10% of this is good, in fact, the percentages are getting better. I mean, in terms of what's really good content the players are making. It still represents a huge amount of content that the players are willing to build for us. This is one of our larger websites, fan websites. They just had a celebration for their 100,000th object that people uploaded on there. Another thing we found from The Sims was that metrics can be extremely useful when you're doing games. You know, we can learn so much from players by studying their play patterns, what they buy, what they do, the verbs they choose. That we can use for various purposes. We see that players hate boundaries. You know, we're seeing a trend toward more open-ended games, you know, especially unnatural boundaries where they just hit kind of an invisible wall in the game. One of the issues there is that as we try to scale up the size of the possibility space for the player, the development effort, again, is kind of a non-linear thing. To build an emergent game takes a lot of iteration. We're currently trying to kind of push that curve down a bit right now by building more emergent gameplay, and we need to also start fighting it on getting cheaper content development. I think there's kind of this inbuilt assumption that the amount of value that a player gets from content is probably a function of the quantity and the quality of it. We can take a title like Pikmin, and you know, it doesn't have that much content, but it's very nice looking, and probably the area described there roughly equals the player value. We can take another game like Katamari Damacy, you know, which has a lot of content, but a much lower quality, and it feels like about the same amount of value. So from that, I think we can kind of infer this gradient. That we're kind of currently, when we think about the amount of content that we do in a game, you know, we're falling somewhere in this gradient in terms of how much value we're providing to the player. I think this is missing a very important dimension, though. I think, the owner